Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I almost didn't want to start this week's show. Not because I don't like doing it, but I am trying to finish a novel I started July 14th, 2019, and I've been working on it ever since. Way back after I retired, I wrote several horror stories. I discovered some of the folks who read horror stories can be rude. I got some comments and several emails from people who had some very nasty things to say. Why is it that the people that like what you do never say anything in writing, but the people that take a minor itty-bitty little bit of offense, they decide to write an entire novel about what they don't like? It's incredible. Well, I decided I was going to switch from horror to humor. I'd rather have a good laugh than a bad scare. I hammered out a book called Flying Saucers Attack Walmart, and a lot of people liked it, so I kept going. I wrote another book called This Sucks. It's about a guy that gets turned into a vampire, but he doesn't know how to be a vampire. I came up with an idea for a character. A young guy who goes to work at a psychic agency only to discover that most of the psychics are fakes, but he can actually see ghosts. I tried getting the character to work, but knowing young guys, since I was one once, I couldn't get the story to flow. Believe it or not, I'm as surprised by the ending of my novels as anyone else. One day I decided to change the main character from a guy to a girl. It worked out just a bit better. I then made her younger, 17, so her mother could have just a bit more leverage on her. The next thing I knew, Pam Bogus of the Bogus Anomalous Group, better known as the Bag, was born. I had to create a whole host of support characters, and I put a lot of effort into making them strange yet likable. Once the book was finished, I kind of missed writing about them. You spend a lot of time doing things in your mind with all these people, and then they're all put away on a shelf somewhere. I had all these people with interesting and bizarre personalities and nothing to do with them. So I wrote a sequel. The Bag Company, Here We Go Again. The neat thing about fiction is you can do anything and go anywhere. It's all in your head and only relegated by your imagination. UFOs Attack the Bag Company is my 9th book in the series that I never intended to write. The book is kind of writing itself, and I'm having fun sitting at my computer watching it appear. I have to kind of force myself to stop writing and work on my show. It's almost like having to go to work. Yes, I am retired, but I have so many side projects going on at once. I have very little time to just sit down and let my mind wander. I put in a garden in the backyard and Well, that takes a bit of work. I have pets, and they all require a lot of work. The funny thing about me being a writer is I have a hard time with spelling. Always have. In school, I could hardly pass a spelling test. I almost failed English. By ninth grade, I had a third grade English ability. That's in reading and writing. When I became a medic, I had a hard time taking tests because I couldn't read what the questions were. I was usually the last one to finish. I did get higher grades, even though it took me so long, usually in the 90s. Processing was a nightmare because there were lots of words we had to type out that I couldn't spell. This led to me buying the Misspeller's Dictionary, but some words, if you can't spell them, you can't look them up. There was no spell check or thesaurus in our processing room. Today, with computers that will spell things for you, I can usually get by as long as the computer knows what I'm trying to say. I've gotten better over the years, but some of my first books are a bit atrocious. As I was writing out my show notes last week, I kept thinking about this one agent. I was not sure I should say anything since just about everybody in the Laredo sector and a lot of folks in other parts of the country know him. Many have heard the stories of his exploits, and some said there was no way any one person could be that out there. Had I not seen most of these things, I would have a hard time believing it myself. I needed a name to use for this one guy. I thought about using his real name, but I thought better of that. He might know a lawyer. He might not like having all of his bizarre ideas put out on the airwaves. He might send me a nasty note. I kicked around a few names to use, and I realized the guy was a dick, so I'm going to call him Dick. If you know some Border Patrol agent named Richard or Rick or Dick, don't call them up and say I'm talking trash about them. The guy's name was not Dick. I'm only calling him that because he was such a dick. If you're listening to this incomprehensible account and think I might just be talking about you, maybe you should try getting your act together and stop making so many horrendous decisions. If you identify with this guy, you might want to change your ways before you get completely screwed up, like he did. He wasn't an evil person. He wasn't bad or even nasty. He just made a whole lot of very bad decisions. On occasion, I would meet somebody who knew this guy, and we'd compare stories. You are free to believe this account or try to convince yourself no one person could be that bad at making decisions. As far as I can remember, all of this is true and it's in order. But so many things happened over such a long period of time, I probably got a lot of them out of sync. Tony Merkel says, "The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off." Here we go with the story of Dick, the Border Patrol agent. I joined the patrol back in 1988. We were shipped off to Anniston, Alabama, of Fort McClellan. A typical Border Patrol class was 50 people. We had 500 split into 10 units of 50 each. Our class was the 226-2. A lot of us had military time, and our first thought was, oh shoot, here we go again. It was almost like that first day in basic. We quickly realized the patrol was not the military. They just tried to intimidate us right off the bat to see who would quit. We lost 2 guys on the first week. We were pretty much a bunch of strangers all shoved together to make one small part of a huge class. We started out with 500 students and graduated 365. A whole lot fell by the wayside due to a woman of negotiable affections who had camped out in the El Paso barracks. It didn't take long for us to form into smaller groups. Those of us with things in common would hang out together on our off time. Just about everyone had a nickname, to a point some of us didn't know what the real names were. For Christmas vacation, Dick wanted to fly home and see his family. He didn't have the money for the trip since he had spent all of his money. He asked one of our classmates, if he would loan him the cash with the understanding that Dick would pay it back immediately at our next paycheck. When our next paycheck arrived, Dick didn't want to pay the loan back, saying he needed the money more than the guy who'd loaned it to him. When Dick went to take a shower, the guy who'd loaned him the money picked the lock on his locker and took all of Dick's clothes, everything, and hid them. Dick came walking back to his locker to find he had nothing to wear. With only a towel to cover things, Dick had to go see the guy who'd loaned him the cash to go home and beg for a return of his clothing. The money had to be returned before clothing would be handed over. For each amount of cash returned, Dick got one piece of clothing. This was when we all began to realize just what a dick the guy could be. Once we escaped from the academy, some of us developed reputations as being strange. I was that guy who believed in UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and other paranormal stuff. This would drive some of my supervisors nuts, and I'd always make it a point to exceed at the weird things. Anytime I could, I would be sure to make the supervisors uncomfortable, as well as some of my classmates. Dick seemed like a rather normal, down-to-earth guy who had been in the Marine Corps. He told us about some of his exploits, and we had no reason to doubt him, until his stories began to overlap. Had he done all the things he claimed, he should have been about 90 years old. One day, during training, Dick showed us a neat trick, if you want to call it that. He didn't have any bullets in his gun. We all discovered this when he said, "Hey, watch this," and he pulled the trigger several times. We all looked at him like he was a total idiot. In law enforcement, you never walk around with an empty weapon. Dick was being a total dick. He'd gone to the range and fired off all of his ammo, and then refused to go buy any more. He said that the government should replace everything, even though we all had an ammo allotment. Sometime after this, Mongo started the Book of Dick. In it, he wrote down all the stupid things Dick did and the things he said. It was a running account of this guy's life. I wonder whatever happened to that book. Dick showed up riding a motorcycle. He said he was going to save money by not using so much gas. He bought the cycle on credit from a local dealership. To save extra money, he sold his car. His wife had no way of getting around town. As I was stepping out the door of my house one morning, I thought, it looks like it's going to rain, and I took my raincoat to work. Dick thought those dark clouds were just clouds. Well, it rained like something out of the Bible. Dick walked into the station dripping wet. He blamed the weatherman for not saying it was going to come down in buckets. Right after muster, he had to go home and change. The next day, it rained even harder, and Dick walked into muster and forming a puddle everywhere he went. Once more, he had to take his service unit back home and get some dry clothes. He decided it was the motorcycle's fault, so he sold it. He now had no way of getting to work, so he had to try bumming lifts from anybody who lived nearby. He received the monthly bill from the motorcycle dealership, but Dick said he didn't have to pay the motorcycle dealership back because he didn't have the motorcycle anymore. Several of us tried to convince him that the loan still had to be paid since he had borrowed the money. He said no, not going to happen. The dealership wound up taking him to court to get their money back. One of our supervisors was going to buy a new car, a Z28. His old vehicle was worth so much as a trade-in, so he offered it to Dick for the price of the trade-in with the understanding that the car could not be sold for profit. This deal was only being made so Dick could get to work. A couple of weeks went by and Dick showed up driving a van. He said he'd traded the car in because it got really bad mileage. The van was worse, but he hadn't noticed it yet. The soup was pissed. He'd made the deal to help Dick out, and Dick turned around and got a better trade-in for the vehicle. Around this time, most of us didn't want to have any kind of dealings with the man. He was turning himself into a pariah. Dick was renting one half of a duplex right next to one of our other classmates named Don. Things were not very happy next door. Dick would borrow the TV guide and not return it until the following week, once it was no longer usable. Once Don refused to loan him anything, he would send his son, little Dick, over to try begging for things. Ketchup or mustard or maybe a loaf of bread. Just about anything borrowed was never returned or replaced. There was a huge old tree next to the driveway where Dick used to park his car. The van was too tall, so he cut the tree down. Never bothered to ask the owner if he could kill that tree. It was in his way, so he removed it. The owner of the duplex was not happy with this decision. Aliens would cross the river under the deck of the railroad bridge. It was hard to see them and even harder to get to them. Once they reached the end of the bridge and ran one of the trails, then we could chase them down and hopefully catch them. We had some folks who crossed the river not to look for work, but to steal or beg money. Most of them used inhalants to make their lives seem better, but much shorter. Sniffing gas or glue will get you higher than a kite, but it will also destroy your brain. I watched an autopsy once where the medical examiner was working on 3 bodies. One was just some old guy who had died. His brain was kind of squishy, but it looked normal. The next body was from a guy who drank himself to death. His brain was liquidy. The doctor had to hold it with both hands, and it looked like a half-full water balloon. It jiggled when he shook it. The last body was a guy who had inhaled glue. His brain was hard like a rock. It had crystallized. The doctor hit it against the edge of the table and bits flaked off. Back to the railroad bridge. Some guy from Mexico was crawling across under the bridge, and he was so incapacitated he crawled right off the edge and plummeted to the ground. It was about 30 feet down. He hit the ground with a thud, landed hard. Dick drove up to him and said he knew medic stuff from the military. He grabbed the guy's legs and tried to straighten them. The guy screamed and rolled into a ball. Dick tried to straighten the guy's body out again. He said this was how you treated an abdominal wound. The other agents kept trying to convince him to stop moving the patient. I wasn't there for that torture session. If I had been, I'd have probably clocked him over the head and gotten in trouble for it. I used to always tell folks, in a medical emergency, if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. I went to vote in the primaries today, and I ran into one of the guys I used to work with. I'm not going to mention Louis's name, or I might. He reminded me of this next little catastrophe that I had completely forgotten about. Something about using a machine to vote. Now, it's not a computer, it just prints out the ballot, but still, I said I was uncomfortable using a machine, and they had to convince me that this thing was approved by the state of Texas, and probably my vote counted. When I started working, we had to type up all the forms, and I do mean a lot. When Congress passed the Reduction in Paperwork Act, the Border Patrol added 2 more forms to the A file. We didn't use a copy machine, so if a form had to be duplicated, we used carbon paper. The 221S could fill an entire hour of nightmare processing. The folks in Washington were surprised when they learned we still processed using ancient technology. It could take up to 4 hours to process 1 OTM. That's any alien not from Mexico. One day, computers began to arrive in our processing room. The IT folks had to hook everything up and get the system running. For some unknown reason, the computers on the left side of the counter were hooked up to a printer on the right side of the room. The computers on the right were hooked up to the printer on the left side of the room. Somebody was being funny, I think. It was announced we would all be sent to class to learn how to use this new equipment. We were given our login passwords and told to not touch the computers until after our training. I asked if the computers came with a backup memory disk, and I was told we wouldn't need one because the system was foolproof. Well, it might have been foolproof, but it wasn't Dick-proof. Late one night, Dick got on one of the computers and he discovered files that he thought somehow referred to him. Maybe they had a designation with his initials or something, but he went ahead and he deleted everything he thought wasn't needed. It must have taken him some time because he pretty much deleted the operating system from the entire bunch of computers. It took the IT guys several more weeks to straighten out the mess he'd made. Dick's login was recorded so everybody knew who to blame, but for some reason he didn't get in much trouble for his misdeed. Getting called into the boss's office and yelled at wasn't even close to the punishment that should have been dealt out. I would have made him sweep the parking lot with a toothbrush or something. For some unknown reason, Dick became convinced he was going to become a dog handler. He bought a great big dog house for the backyard. He told everybody he knew how to handle dogs. Not being issued a dog from work and having a dog house with no one to occupy it, Dick went and bought a dog. A big dog because it was a big dog house. A trainee, simply some agent who had a few months less than him, got sent to the training instead, and Dick was really upset. One day, him and his family went away on vacation, and they left the dog in the house. Late at night, Don heard strange sounds coming from next door. It sounded like an animal in distress. He went next door and, using some skills picked up in an earlier life, he managed to jimmy the back door and look inside. The dog had been left with a 50-pound bag of dog food piled up in one corner. Well, the dog, I guess, had been told, only eat what you need, don't eat it all at once. Well, the dog ate the whole thing, probably in the first day and a half. Once it was full, it had to do something with all that waste inside, so it went to the bathroom everywhere. There was dog dew in every corner. Well, Don opened the back door and he let the dog outside. And as he was walking around the house, he noticed there were some huge holes through the sheetrock where the dog had literally tried to dig his way out. There were sheetrock scraps and dust everywhere. Once back from the trip, Dick decided he had to get rid of that van because it got such lousy mileage. He traded it in on are you ready for this? An Olds 442. If you're trying to get good mileage, you don't go shopping for muscle cars, but, well, once again, Dick was being a dick. After driving this car for several weeks, he finally got around to opening the hood. There on the valve covers it said 350. It took a while for the lights to come on. His 442 did not have a 442 cubic inch engine. It came with a small block 350. Dick was very upset, cussing out the dealership for false advertising. We asked him if at any time while he was looking at the car did he bother to open the hood. He never even got down and looked underneath the car. It makes my heart hurt just thinking about some of the bizarre things this guy did. Not to worry. Once he'd calmed down, Dick decided he was going to pull the engine and replace it with a bigger power plant. Then he was going to race it down on the county line drag strip. Having raced cars at one time, he figured he would win a lot of prize money. Well, that's what he said anyway. To call him a shade tree mechanic wouldn't work because he'd cut the tree down. He parked his car in the driveway and got busy taking the motor apart. Just drained the oil in the transmission on the ground, killing what little grass had been there. Engine parts were lined up in no particular order all along the sides of the driveway. In order to get to work, once more he had to ask other agents for a ride. After several weeks of this nonsense, he managed to buy an old pickup truck so he could get back and forth to work until his muscle car could be back on the road. Well, another dog handler position was announced, and this time Dick got the union to back him up. He went to Sector saying he was eligible to become a dog handler because of some very convincing reason that made no sense to the folks up north, but somehow they decided that they were going to send him off to dog training school. Everybody at South said, "What the heck are those folks at Sector thinking?" We weren't asked. I guess a lot of the foolishness going on in Dick's life wasn't passed on to those making the big decisions. Maybe on paper he looked good. Maybe some of our supervisors should have stormed Sector announcing this was going to lead to much wailing and gnashing of teeth, but they didn't, and Dick went away to training. The training is 3 or 4 months long. Dick was getting paid every 2 weeks, like usual, but his wife did not have access to the bank account. They had issues. After the first month, she called him and said that the rent was due on the duplex. Dick went to the bank and had them wire the rent using his government-issued American Express card. Did you know those things don't have a spending limit? Since he was on detail, he figured this was okay. Then the light bill and the water and the cable and all the other bills that needed to be paid came in, so he just did the same thing. He drew money out using his government charge card. This went on the entire time he was at training, paying bills using the government card. Dick didn't pass the test and was sent home. It wasn't anything he did. The folks at training didn't know anything. Once he got back home, Dick submitted his expenses. Flight to and from training, per diem. That's money that you use for expenses while away from home. He added all those cash draws as well, and I think it came to about $5,000. The government sent him a check to cover the flight and the per diem, about $1,800. So, Dick sent the $1,800 to the card company. He said that was all he had to pay because that's all he got from the government. We did our best to try convincing him that he had to pay the entire bill off, especially the money he'd drawn out to pay his own bills. We're talking over $3,000 here. Dick hadn't learned his lesson with borrowing money to fly home or the motorcycle incident. The folks at American Express had to take him to court to get their money back. A sector put Dick on probation and they canceled his card. Here's the weird thing. Even if you didn't go on a detail, we all had to have a government credit card. Dick wasn't the only agent who abused his card. One guy bought gifts for his sweetheart, not for his wife, and another bought himself a big screen TV. Several guys checked into hotel rooms when they weren't on details, and another group of people used their government card to gas up on their own vehicle. Somehow Dick was able to outshine all of these other people. Some of these incidents, like I said earlier, are going to be out of order. I can't remember exactly when these bizarre feats of mental anguish took place. Sometime around here, his wife packed up and left him. She got on a bus and sailed away, heading back home. Dick decided since it was now just him and his son, he didn't need such a big place, so he packed his bags and moved to an apartment closer to work so he could... Can you guess it yet? He was going to save money on gas. That 442 with the engine scattered all over the yard was left sitting in the driveway. One day a couple of guys came by asking if it was for sale. Don, who was so glad not to have Dick living next door, sold them the car for a few $100s. Dick just about went ballistic, saying he had no right to sell that car since it was gone, that Don now had to give him the money. Don told him to pound sand, and he kept the cash. It was for all the pain and suffering from having Dick as a neighbor. Dick used to talk about his exploits while in the Marine Corps. He was sent to jump school. He was a diver. He drove a tank. He did all kinds of exciting things. One day Willie asked him what his MOS was, and Dick gave him the designation. Willie announced that Dick was a Remington Ranger, better known as a clerk typist. All those schools Dick said he attended were not offered to the guys working in an office. I guess his imagination got away with him, and he dreamt he was in those classes. He went as far as to say that he taught some of the classes that he didn't attend. Last week I talked about the Border Patrol putting together the Bike Patrol. I was on the bikes having a good time when the next rotation came on. Every 6 months, half of our guys would go back to the line and they'd get replaced with new agents. Somehow, Dick got put on the bike patrol. Well, Dick told the boss, George, that he was a professional bike racer at one time. George told him he was absolutely not allowed to work on his own bike or anyone else's. Any work that had to be okayed by George or me. I have no idea how my name got into it. I guess maybe because I could actually fix small problems with bikes. I had my own bike stand and quite a few dollars worth of tools at the house. Some folks kept making the exact same mistake over and over. I get tired of saying it. Dick sold his pickup truck so he could save money on gas. He was going to ride his patrol bike back and forth to work, which is only a few miles each way. This plan worked out great for a couple of days. On the weekends, Dick found he was stuck without any way to buy groceries or take his son anywhere he needed to go. Once more, Dick began asking people to give him rides, and this time it was on his days off. We had 2 shifts on the bikes. Early shift started at 8 a.m., finished up at 4. The late shift started at 10 a.m. and ended at 6 p.m. This gave us better coverage of the areas we worked. We very seldom worked at night. Dick had told George he absolutely had to be on the late shift so he could get his son off to school. George agreed, which got everybody trying to get the early shift. Nobody wanted to work with Dick. Bizarre things were bound to happen, leading to someone having to write a memo. Dick was known for yelling at people for wearing their hat backwards on the street. Just some person with their hat on backwards, and Dick would take it into his mind that he should say something about it. He would actually get into arguments with citizens for no reason. Well, it dawned on Dick that his kid was coming home from school to an empty apartment. So he went to George and insisted on being placed on the early shift so he could be home when his son got there. George agreed and put Dick on the early shift, which got everybody to wanting to be on the late shift. The Border Patrol is not there to raise your kids or even help raise them. You take the job and your personal life was not considered. If you're having trouble at home, you are expected to deal with it or find some other occupation. If all possible, some supervisors would try to help out with scheduling, and that was about it. George was especially nice. One of the easiest supervisors to work for. And now Dick's kid was having to get up by himself and get out the door in the morning. So Dick went to George and asked for the late shift, followed a few days later by wanting the early shift again. In an effort to help out, some of the wives and other agents would take little Dick in after school. This soon led to many wives saying they would never allow that little monster in their homes again. I guess little Dick was a dick as well. As George was moving things around to try to accommodate this mess, Dick decided he wanted to take night classes at the community college. I did ask him what he was going to do with his son, but he never answered that question. Fortunately, I rotated out and I was back on the line before George had to deal with Dick going to college and needing the early shift again. Somehow he managed to run into some female who didn't have much taste when it came to men. He moved in with her, and I think they might have gotten married, but I won't swear to it. She bought him a small pickup so he could go to work. He had to drive into town from Bruni, a 48-mile trip one way every day. So much for saving on gas. One day he showed up with all of his things hanging from the back of the pickup. I guess she'd gotten tired of his nonsense. I hope she wasn't still making payments on that truck because it wasn't long for this world. Dick asked if he could use my garage to store all of his things, to which I said, absolutely not. He asked around and he wound up renting one of our other classmates' garages to both store his stuff and live in. This led to him selling the small pickup and buying a car from his new landlord. As I'm telling this story, I'm finding it hard to believe, even though I was there for 90% of it. I saw this train wreck as it was taking place, yet it sounds impossible. It really did happen. Sign cutting, my favorite detail, and a bunch of us managed to con our way onto it. It was me, BT, Rudy, and another guy named Rudy, and we all just happened to be classmates. All four of us had been at the academy together, and we made the most of it. We were expected to have 7-day coverage, so we might only have 1 or 2 guys working each day. The boss decided to add 2 more guys to our shift. Who do you think it was? Dick and another guy. Looking at these 2, we all said we hadn't actually gained any manpower. At least the 4 of us were still out there, but we were going to pay the price. Nobody wanted to work with Dick, so we scheduled him to work with the other guy, the other new guy, every day. I was stuck doing the scheduling. It's not because I was actually in charge. It was because my last name started with a J and the others had a T, an L, and an M. I was the first one on the list in alphabetical order, so I got stuck doing the scheduling. We seemed to work pretty good not having a supervisor for the entire year that we were out there, and I guess nobody ever noticed that they never assigned one to us. Well, we all knew what to do and how to do it, except for Dick. One of our team was always considered to be the nicest guy on the planet. He did have an evil streak. Most never got to see it, or they never realized that it was there. Dick and his partner would get on some sign and they'd begin following it. Now, the right way of doing things was that one agent would get out on foot and the other would try to drive ahead and catch the group in the middle. The fun part of sign cutting was being the guy on foot. This was the main reason people put in for the detail. These 2 both wanted to be the agent who walked up on the group. So they would both get out and follow the sign on foot. Then they would try to call us to cut around in front of them. My partner would get on the radio and he would say that we were here or they were there, but he would never actually give the right location. Then he'd get me to drive up ahead of Dick and his partner, who was now being referred to as the Master Blaster, like the 2 guys in Beyond Thunderdome, and we would try to snatch the group out from under them. It's amazing how many times this actually worked. We would grab the group, load them up in our vehicle, and leave. Once we dropped them off at the bridge, my partner would get on the radio and tell Dick and his partner that the group is back in Mexico and they're going to have to walk back to their vehicle because there seems to be something wrong with our vehicle and we are now en route to the garage to have it looked at. Many times this nasty ploy worked just as my evil partner wanted it to. It was funny, though. You'd think after having to walk back a few miles, they would have gotten the idea for one of them to stay with the vehicle and drive ahead, so maybe they could catch the group and not have to walk so many miles back for their vehicle. Somehow, Dick became the local president of the union. I think nobody else wanted the job. A new class came in, and he went to talk to them about the benefits of joining the union. I, for one, never joined any union. I told them each month I would rather throw a $20 bill away than waste it on their trips to Vegas. Dick told the assembled trainees that if they joined the union and paid their fee, something like $150 each, he would hold on to some of the cash for them and they would get most of it back for their probie party. Once they passed their final exams and didn't upset the older agents, they were expected to throw a party for the station. The class managed to all pass and were making plans for their party. Dick told them they couldn't have their money back because it all went for union stuff. Things like sending Dick to Vegas for the annual union conference and party. Gambling and drinking and not much meeting or learning. Every one of them told me they were going to quit the union as soon as they could. A great job there, Dick. A supervisor slot came open, someplace not in Laredo, and Dick managed to get picked. He was out of the state before we could plan his gone party. No one threw him a going-away party. No one would have attended. We were glad he was not around anymore, so we had a he's not here anymore party instead. El Centro, California was having a problem with aliens trying to walk across the desert and dying. It was decided to bring in medics from all over the country to try rescuing these folks. I managed to avoid this detail for as long as I could. I didn't want to work in California because the patrol out there was way too soft. They kowtowed to the aliens and the special interest groups that made money saying they were helping out the aliens while pocketing huge sums of cash. I was finally ordered to pack my bags and get on a flight to California. And I was going to spend a month looking for sick people in need of rescue. I showed my badge and my ID at the Laredo airport, and I flew to Dallas. We got stuck waiting on a rainstorm, and we were 2 hours late arriving in L.A. I had to walk outside the building to get to the terminal where my next flight was going to launch from. I walked up to the woman running the security station and showed her my badge and ID, and she told me to take the side corridor around security. This is how all law enforcement do it, if they're flying armed. Keep in mind, 9/11 had just happened about a year before my TSA debacle. People were still paranoid about flying. At the far end of this corridor sat a TSA guy. He filled out his jacket. He told me I couldn't use this corridor. I showed him my badge and my ID. He told me I still had to go through security like everybody else. I told him I was going to set off the metal detector since I was flying armed. He had a shocked look on his pudgy little face, and he asked, why would I set off the metal detector? I showed him my badge and my ID once more. He looked at it with a glazed look on his face. I could see the wheels behind his eyes were failing to engage. He had that thinking hard look on his face for a few, and then he said I still had to go through security. I walked back to the front of security, and the woman there said I should go through the other corridor. I told her the TSA guy said I still had to go through her station. As she left to try to clear up the problem. I stood there for about 5 minutes watching folks going through, wondering what I had done wrong to deserve such treatment. At long last, she returned with kind of an embarrassed look on her face. She told me the TSA guy said I could go around the metal detector, but my carry-on had to be checked. I had 2 boxes of bullets in there, extra magazines for my pistol. I usually carried 6. My knife, my handcuffs, my radio, all my work gear that I didn't want to lose in my luggage if it got sent to China. I slapped my bag down on the conveyor belt and ran around the security checkpoint so I could see the look on the guy's face as my bag went through. I stood there waiting. And then the red light began to revolve, and the guy running the machine's eyes were huge. My bag full of things had caught his eye. The woman in charge had to convince him there was no problem. He wanted to know who was the idiot that sent my bag through X-ray full of bullets and knives and things. I saw her whispering to him and pointing to the guy in the blue jacket. TSA, what a waste of money. A TSA stands for thousands standing around. I missed my flight and I wound up having to rent a car to drive from LA to El Centro. I arrived in town just after midnight. I wanted to know where I was to report for in the morning, so I drove to the station. As I was pulling into the parking lot, who did I run into? Dick. He was now a supervisor at El Centro. It was all I could do not to turn around and speed out the driveway and head back to Texas as fast as I could. Thankfully, the detail I was on had nothing to do with him. I wound up working out of a trailer on the other side of town. The whole time I was out there, folks would ask me to tell them Dick stories. Over the 30 days I was there, I never told the same story twice. It also turned out that Dick had told the guys in charge he knew how to ride a horse. He spent most of his year on horse patrol, limping around sector after getting thrown from the horse several times. We used to have a saying in the patrol, screw up, move up. I don't know how or why, but Dick got promoted once more and was sent to Washington just before the economy crashed. He was a supervisor working as an acting A-chief. I began spreading the rumor that he was responsible for the monetary losses. I told people that Dick had invested the nation's money in a Ponzi scheme. Nobody wanted to believe me, but a lot of them said that it sounded about right. If I offended you in some way, too bad. If you work for TSA, you should look for another job. You're wasting your time. If you think I'm just making this stuff up, I can get about 75 retired Border Patrol agents to swear this all happened. Maybe not in the order I told it, but the stories are all true. Some of us are put here on the earth to show the world how things can be done. Others are here to show the world how things should never be done. I used to tell people at work, when you left the station or retired, people should be sad. People should miss having you there to either make life a bit more enjoyable or to help out from a sticky situation. If the shift holds a gone party instead of a going away party, you're doing things wrong. I guess I must have been liked at work. They gave me 3 retirement parties. Oh, I was still blamed for everything that went wrong around sector once I was gone. This is kind of an SOP. It was all his fault, but we can't do anything about it since he's retired now. Anything that went missing that was not on my property card was blamed on me as well. He must have either taken it or lost it because we can't find it, but there's nothing we can do now because he's retired. Being in the Border Patrol was one of the best jobs and one of the worst jobs I ever had. The guys I worked with were the only reason I kept showing up. The guys I liked, that is. The ones I didn't like to be on the same planet with, well, they made for some horrible days and nights. Chasing folks through the brush is fun in a weird kind of way. Processing folks from other parts of the world was horrible. I hated processing ever since I caught 28 OTMs at the end of a shift. Being the medic on special ops was kind of neat until things got really messed up. Having some stranger's life in your hands can be a bit disturbing. If they die, you might blame yourself, but I never did. I knew what I was doing, and I also knew that you couldn't save every life. Some folks were going to die no matter what you did. If you find yourself thinking you just might be Dick, stop being a dick and work at getting people to like you. Stop making bad decisions. Stop trying to please the people in the front office and try taking care of the guys you work with or that work under you. If you're looking for a gift for someone and can't decide, check out tpublic.com. Maybe a Strange Things t-shirt or coffee cup. You could also buy them a book. I have several. Amazon.com carries some books that I should probably have never published, but I did. It's how you learn to write. I now understand why folks like Dean Koontz tell that they wrote several books that are not being published. It's the only way you learn. You hammer out a story, you go back and you read it, and you say to yourself, who wrote this trash? Or you hammer out several stories, and eventually you get good at it, and then you start publishing. Well, I started publishing before I got good at it, but I'm still working at it. Buy a book or a t-shirt, and I get a little bit of cash. It's something to help pay for the show, which most of the show is free, but every now and then I have to buy an app or replace my computer, which is expensive, buy a new microphone or a microphone base. There's always some tiny little expense that comes up. If you'd like to contact me, you can write to strangethings@arkanasa.com. That's ARCANASA. It's the Ark and NASA. Noah's Ark, not the other one, Abraham's. The big boat. If you have a show idea, something you'd like to hear me talk about, or maybe you've seen something or heard something that you think is paranormal and might just sound good in a book, I'm going to eventually start on book number 5, nonfiction. Book number 4 is out, Paranormal Stories. If you sent me a story that you hope to read about, it should be in there. If it's not, send me another note because things disappear all the time. Send me another note and I'll be sure to put you in my next book. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?